welcome to Made a Hames Out of It. I'm Kate Hames and I hope you're having a fabulous day. Here at Made a Hames Out of It, we find disasters, curses and sometimes total fuck-ups which are generally hilarious and usually only for our own pleasure, but it would be rude not to share. Let me explain the whole made a Hames out of it. A hames is a piece of equipment used on horses. It is made from either metal or wood and is attached to the horse's collar. It then distributes weight evenly around the horse's neck and shoulders. Interesting, I hear you say, but what the fudge has that got to do with anything? Well, these hameses are apparently quite tricky to attach, or at least fit correctly. And so, many years ago, a saying was born, "You made a right hames out of that." And honestly, that fits so perfectly for my ever so interesting family of Hameses, whose lives have often been tainted with ill fate, ironic missed opportunities, eerie cases of bad luck, and an ominous air of being cursed. And, with that in mind, I want to bring you some disasters from around the world, some curses, some misfortune. Are they all just random incidents, coincidences, or is something more sinister at play? We're all familiar with the Titanic, the big ship that sank in 1912 after hitting an iceberg, leading to the untimely deaths of over 1,500 people. What you may not be familiar with is the random conspiracy theories that surround the disaster. Well, let me take you on a ridiculous journey into how easy it is for people to make mountains out of molehills, exaggerate beyond their wildest dreams, and give weird theories into how this giant made a hames out of it disaster came to be. Theory number 1. Doomed from the beginning. When the Titanic was being built in Belfast, Catholic shipbuilders were horrified to find the hull number to be 3904-04, which, when flipped upside down, looks to read "No Pope," which of course was deemed to be blasphemous, and the workers believed the ship to be doomed. It turns out that this is all complete nonsense. The ship's number was actually 401, and it seems the other Pope number was just completely made up. Just for fun, I turned 401 upside down and you'll never guess what I saw. Well, I saw what looked like 701. 7 minus 1 is 6, and there are 3 digits, so clearly this is a sign of the devil. Do you see how easy this is? You can make up any old bollocks. Plus, the shipbuilding firm Harland and Wolff didn't even have any Catholics working for them at the time. They apparently had a bit of a reputation for only employing Protestants. Theory number 2. In 1915, a British ocean liner was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland by a German U-boat, killing 1,198 people. Some people believe that the Titanic was a precursor to this attack. Although there is little to no evidence to support this theory, some survivor accounts do say they saw a vessel maybe 5 to 6 miles away from the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. And there was actually a ship nearby, 2 in fact, the SS Californian and the SS Carpathia, both of which came under scrutiny for not reacting faster to the distress signals from the Titanic. Theory number 3. That the Titanic never sank. Now this one to me is stupid because it rests fully on the Titanic not being the Titanic, and it was actually its sister ship, the Olympic, and they had been swapped for insurance reasons, which is a load of bollocks. The Olympic, I believe, was involved in a collision with another ship, the Hawk, and the insurers refused to pay out. So the Olympic was brought into the shipyard, patched up and sent out in place of the Titanic. The ship that was supposed to be the Titanic would then later be used under the name Olympic. It's not as confusing as it sounds and is probably one of the more plausible conspiracy theories, but whatever it was called, it still sank. Plus, when the Olympic was later demolished, not one piece of it had the Titanic's name or ship numbers on it. So the evidence for this swap doesn't exist. Theory number 4. J.P. Morgan set the whole thing up. On board the Titanic were some very powerful, influential men, and J.P. Morgan wanted rid of them as they opposed the Federal Reserve, which he was in favour of. But instead of finding an inconspicuous way of assassinating his biggest rivals, he chose a hugely elaborate scheme that involved murdering thousands of innocent people and destroying a £7.5 million ship in the process. I don't think so. The entire basis for this theory is that J.P. Morgan himself was supposed to be on board the Titanic, but he changed his mind at the last minute, instead choosing to stay in Europe and find some tapestries for his art collection. Also, I couldn't find anything to explain how he conducted the master plan. Did he pay someone off to lose the binocular cupboard key? Was he really rich enough to have an iceberg towed into the path of the ship without anyone noticing? I don't think so. Theory number 5, and my entire reason for this episode. I'd never heard of this particular theory surrounding the Titanic before, and I'm struggling to recall where I've heard it recently. However, this is the theory that the Titanic was carrying a cursed mummy, which in turn led to the catastrophic events. After initially being very excited to research the mummy curse that sank the Titanic, I was immediately disappointed when I came to realise that there's very little information out there about it, at least not legitimate information, mainly because it's all utter bollocks. This particular mummy they speak of does exist, and so does the curse, if you believe in them, but she never set foot on the Titanic. She didn't sink it neither, or if she did, it was from her home in a museum exhibit, and that's quite clever. She was, however, responsible for several other tragedies and deaths. Let's go back to Luxor, Egypt, 1890. 4 well-to-do Englishmen are doing whatever it is that rich young men did in Egypt in 1890, when they are asked if they would like to buy a mummy case which contained the remains of Princess Amun-Ra. They each drew straws to determine who would buy it. One lad paid a hefty sum and had the coffin delivered to his hotel room. He was later seen walking off into the desert, never to be seen again. Of the other 3 friends, one was shot and had to have his leg amputated, another lost his entire life savings due to his bank going under, and the third fell ill, lost his job, and ended up selling matches on the street. When the ill-fated coffin arrived in England, a man bought it, and almost immediately 3 members of his family were involved in a road accident and his house burnt down. The mummy then went to the British Museum. Whilst being unloaded from a truck, the truck randomly started reversing, trapping a passerby. As the coffin was being carried by 2 workers, one fell and broke his leg, and the other died days later without explanation. Once in the museum, people heard banging and wailing coming from the coffin, and objects were thrown around the exhibition hall. One of the watchmen died, and other workers refused to enter the room. Apparently, a visitor flicked a dust cloth in the direction of the mummy's face, and days later his child died from measles. The casket was then moved to the basement by 2 people, one of whom fell seriously ill, and the other was found dead at his desk. A journalist took a photo of the mummy, and when he developed the photo, it produced a grotesque-looking face. The journalist then shot himself. The mummy was then sold to a private collector, following other mishaps and death. This private collector put the mummy in his attic and tried to have it exorcised by Madame Helena Blavatsky, only to be told that this evil cannot be exorcised and must be destroyed. So instead of doing that, he sold it to an American archaeologist who would later be a passenger on board the Titanic for its maiden voyage to New York. And this became Princess Amun-Ra's grand finale, the collective demise of over 1,500 people, and she is at last laid to rest at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. This, of course, is utter bollocks. Well, at least the bit about being on board the Titanic is. There were no records of a mummy or any other Egyptian artefacts being on board. There was nothing in the ship's manifest. The mummy in question does exist, though it's actually just a mummy board which would have been laid above the remains. The whereabouts of the actual remains are unknown, but the board resided in the British Museum. The board resides in the British Museum under artefact number 22542. And, just for fun, I thought I'd see what weird coincidency things I could get from that number. Well, obviously, 42 jumped out at me straight away, as that is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Then I searched 225, and apparently this number represents major life changes, choices, and manifestations of dreams and goals. So, if that isn't proof that a mummy sank the Titanic, I don't know what is. Here are a few random Titanic facts which I found rather interesting. Number 1. There were 12 dogs on board the Titanic. Unfortunately, 9 died, but 3 were rescued, 2 Pomeranians and a Pekingese. Number 2. The money made worldwide from the film Titanic would be enough to build nearly 5 Titanics. Number 3. Masabumi Hosono was the only Japanese passenger on board the Titanic. He survived, but was condemned by Japan for not dying with the other passengers. They deemed him a coward. Number 4. The Titanic 2 is now under development and is set to start operating in 2022, with the most expensive tickets costing around $100,000. Number 5. 2 crew members, Violet Jessup and Arthur John Priest, survived not only the sinking of the Titanic, but also the collision with the Olympic and the Hawke and the sinking of the Britannic in 1916. The Titanic, the Olympic, and the Britannic were all sister ships. That's weird. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please let me know. You can subscribe wherever you're listening to this, and do get in touch with MAHOOI either on Facebook and Instagram at MadeAHames, or on Twitter at MadeAHames, or visit the website madeahames.com. You can also now leave me a voice message via Anchor, so if you want to say hey or have any info about anything I've talked about in any of the episodes, please do let me know. Until next time, goodbye.